Okay, hopefully this works. Looks like it's working. Let us see. Hey everyone, I'm just double checking to make sure this is working. Because yeah, girl always is struggling. Hopefully my shared screen is working. Okay, I think this is working. Hi everyone. If you are logged in to the training, can you let me know that you can see my screen and everything is working the way it's supposed to do? This is the first time I'm actually able to share my screen, and I want to make sure it's actually working. So I'm just going to wait for one of you to just give me the okay that I'm good to go. Because otherwise, this will be a very boring training. Well, not really. You just won't see what I'm looking at. Thank you, Deanna. Okay. Hallelujah. Amazing, amazing. I'm figuring it out, people. Okay, so I am so excited to talk to you today about this. I built this group originally because I was so frustrated with not understanding how to ethically, legally integrate alternative practices, unconventional practices in the mental health space without risking my license. The available information on how to do this and guidelines on how to do this do not exist outside of my group. I have looked. It's not there. And based on the need in the mental health community, this is something that's really important for us to have so that we can move ethically, we can move within our regulatory guidelines, and more importantly, that we move competently and that we move with integrity in how we are providing mental health services. So I'm really excited to go over this with you today. If you're following along, you like what you hear, definitely give me some hearts and some thumbs up. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write your questions in the chat below, and I will get back to you either in live time or after the training's over if you're watching the replay. So I'll be looking down just to see if you guys message me since I can't see it on the screen. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, every week we just have so many more people joining the group, like 100 new members. It's really, really awesome. My name is Dr. Tina Vitolo. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have my doctorate in social work. I have spent 4 years of my life researching complementary and alternative practices in the mental health field. It is an absolute love of mine. So I'm bringing this all to you today because this is not only a professional need, but this is a personal goal of mine to make sure that the world gets better, innovative therapists that are able to provide less rigid, more engaging, more, I don't know, sparkly, shiny modalities into the clinical world, because it's exactly what I needed when I was growing up. And I think it's definitely what the world needs, especially right now, innovators and people that don't throw people into boxes and are allowed to be flexible and merge with the needs of the populations that they're serving. Okay, so let's get into it. All right, so this is our training outline. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but I will let you know that every single thing that I do go over, I also go through ad nauseum in my Innovative Practitioner Accelerator program. And if there's particular things you have questions on, if there's particular things you want more information on, just let me know. I'll be happy to answer them and give you whatever information you need. I answer all of my DMs if you send them. So please do not hesitate. Ask your question again in the chat or just post it on the page, whatever it is. What my expertise, I'll be able to answer you. And also we have some amazing practitioners actually in the group that might be able to give you some information as well. So what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to just review scope of practice. I'm going to actually pull some pieces that I've actually got from online, and I'm also going to go over ethical guidelines. Although I think some of you believe that these are one thing, these are actually two different distinct things and two areas that we need to be really aware of as we are working with clients and engaging in our clinical practice. I'm also going to go through clinical theory and why it's so important. I want to talk about clinical theory all the time, but I also know that some people are like, why do we have to talk about clinical theory? Well, I'm going to explain to you why, especially after we go through what our scope of practice and what the statutes indicate regarding competency and how we are supposed to be moving in our clinical work with clients. I'm going to talk about how to use modalities in a complementary way and why this is really important to remain within scope of practice to clinical knowledge and application. And I'm also going to highlight some underlying themes between clinical and non-clinical treatment, just to give you an idea of how you can start looking at the other modalities that you're bringing into and see how they align. Because we are talking about the same exact language here. It's all about healing. It's about discovery. It's about expansion. It's about finding ourselves. So there is an absolute way to merge these. So I'm going to be going over that as well. And then I'm going to get into an evidence-based framework and how to integrate your modalities within this framework. Also going over the importance of identifying potential risks, highlighting your training, overall just to build transparency in your informed consent. So for whoever's watching, who's excited, super excited about the training. Okay, let's get into it. So I wanted to just go over what ethical practice is and the expectations, as well as a definition for you to keep this in mind. And I'm going to propose a question to you after I'm done reviewing this, and I'm just curious how you all feel about that. Hey, Drea. Okay, so ethics in the context of psychotherapy and clinical practice is going to refer to the principles and standards that are going to guide professionals in their conduct, decision-making, and relationships with their clients, ensuring that their actions promote the well-being, the dignity, the rights of those they serve while maintaining the integrity of the profession. I underlined certain pieces of this because I think we all know this, right? This isn't a shocking definition to you. You're like, yeah, well, duh, like, of course. When it comes to our responsibility with this, how can we prove, how can we show that we are doing this? Okay, so I want you to keep that question in mind as I kind of go through these bullet points below here, okay? So it is our responsibility to showcase our due diligence in following our ethical expectations, to promote those well-being of our clients, to avoid causing no harm to clients, ensuring interventions and treatments are beneficial and safe, that we're promoting honesty and transparency in professional interactions, and that we're accurately representing our qualifications, our services, and the outcomes. We need to be avoiding deception, fraud, and misrepresentation. We need to recognize and address biases and discriminatory practices, and we need to practice within the boundaries of our competence. Now, this is a very quick snapshot. You know, most of these code of ethics are like 800 pages long, right? I read one. But these are kind of like the main points that I just want to focus on today. So if I was to ask you, how would you prove that you're meeting all of these expectations for ethical clinical practice? Now, if you were to ask me a few years back how I would prove it, I think I'd be like a little tongue-tied, because we need to show due diligence and applications that we are actually participating in the ethical expectations. Now, they teach us about ethical practice. They give us examples about ethical practice. But like if we were in a court of law, let's just say, and someone said, well, how have you been doing this? What are we going to say? And I feel like that's the part that school has dropped and not really provided us with. And, you know, the board, as much as I used to believe that they were there to protect us and clients, it's more for the clients, but there is a lack of guidance in terms of like, how do we do this? How do we verbally express this? How do we written express this? And are we really capturing all of that in our informed consent? I mean, I know when I first started out, I just downloaded one online and just like added some pieces to it. So I'm really curious for those who are watching. Do you feel really confident? I know, Deanna, you already feel confident in this, but do you feel really confident that you are able to show that you are moving within the ethical expectations of the profession? And I'm not saying that to scare you, but if you are getting triggered by the question, that just means you might want to lean into it a little bit. I'll say personally, I absolutely at one point was not. Okay. So now let's get into your scope of practice and what it really says. Now, I have read so many state boards scopes of practices. Like I have read at least 35 of them now. Oh, Deanna, you wrote something. Professional member of my professional organization statements within my informed consent statements and memberships displayed on my website, client evaluations. Yeah. Deanna, you taught me something really great. You said, I think the way you worded it is like, explain it 3 different ways. Like have it written, have a conversation about it, post it on your website. Like so that you can say like, I here, and here, and this is where you can find it. So like, I thought that was great advice. I forget the exact language you use, but if you remember what it is, post it in there. But when we're really looking at our state boards, which I have to also say, what a nightmare to try and find. Because I mean, I know we're in New York State, Florida, Georgia, now Massachusetts, but it takes me a while to like really get my hands on the most updated one and one that actually gives information versus just lists statutes. Like it shouldn't be this difficult to get our hands on the like regulatory guidelines on how we're supposed to move, but it is difficult. And for me, my brain shuts down and then I have to kind of go back. And I consider myself like a pretty educated person. And sometimes the language in here, I'm like, what? So what I want to tell you is that based on what I have read so far, I'm not saying it's a complete exhaustive list, but I'm getting there with the research. There's currently no explicit language that states that we have to use an evidence-based practice approach or empirically supported treatment modalities. I have yet to come across one state statute scope of practice for the profession that actually says that. And if anyone has one that really does say that, please send it my way. Because at this point, I don't think it actually exists. And I'm going to tell you why I don't think it exists. When it comes to empirically supported treatment modalities, right? These are going to be focused on very like heterogeneous groups, like so the same kind of population over and over. So typically what this ends up being is like white females in these groups or, you know, white males or whatever. So it doesn't allow for diversity to exist when we are assessing these, you know, empirically supported manualized approaches, right? Now, in the same breath, in your scope of practice, if you're saying that we need to be inclusive, that we need to be open to diverse practices, that we need to allow, you know, alignment of the individual's needs, preferences, values into the space, I don't think that's going to be possible if all we're using is empirically supported treatment modalities and using empirically supported treatment modalities as they were taught. I believe that there needs to be some flexibility there in the application, but holding on to the essence, which is when I think theory comes in into the process, right? So if you look here, I don't know if like how small this is on your screen, but you're going to see here the word theory, counseling approaches are going to come up a lot. And I saw this in a majority, like, you know, let's focus on family systems theories and, you know, human development theories and social work theories and using modalities that align with clinical theory. Like, that's very broad, actually. It's not as rigid. But I will say that our scopes of practice really do have some rigid guidelines with certain things, like don't have sex with your clients, you know, don't be under the influence when you're treating someone. Very clear there. Or if you are going to engage in sex with your client, you know, wait 5 years, like very cut, dry, boom, boom, boom. Got it. Easy. This stuff, not so much. Because there's a lot of language kind of flowing around here, especially when it comes to like competency and training and experience, all of that. So just because they don't have guidelines does not mean, at least to me, that I can do whatever I want. I feel like because there's a lack of clarity and we just say, all right, well, there's no guidelines, they can't really hold me to it. I don't think that allows for integrity in the clinical space. So if I just say I'm going to do whatever I want and I don't understand the applications, I'm not able to speak to them, I'm not able to align them with clinical concepts, I'm not able to say how they create change. Now I feel like I'm getting into a very dangerous space. And if you go back to what I said about ethics, like, where can you show your due diligence that you are moving ethically, even if maybe there's no particular guidelines on how to implement it? Got to keep that in mind when you're moving as a mental health therapist. Any feedback, questions, anything so far? No? Cool. All right. If you do, just pop them in. Okay. So why theory is so important. I'm just going to take a drink of water here really quickly. All right. So theory is important because it is mentioned in our state statutes and scope of practice. The thing about theory is it's not something that is thoroughly educated on, yet seems to have a really high expectation in the field. And knowing your theory behind the modalities that you're using is going to build competency in your practice with clients. It hits on these three areas, foundational understanding. So having knowledge on the theory that influences your work is going to provide a solid foundation for understanding why certain techniques and interventions work. So it will help you bring language to the application. And I don't know about you, but when I first started off as a baby therapist, I didn't know my clinical theory. I knew of one. I kind of was messing around with psychodynamic, like, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. But I really didn't understand that there were multiple theories that influenced my work, and there were multiple beliefs that helped me understand change. But this was probably also because I just was still moving in a wounded state and didn't really understand myself very well. And theory is really what helped me, like, solidified, like, really helped me get why I work the way I work, why I work with certain clients the best, and why I'm drawn to certain interventions the way I'm drawn to them. And connecting that is really going to diminish that imposter syndrome. Okay. Next part here is theory is going to help with informed decision making. So if you're a therapist and you understand the theory behind your work, it's going to help you make informed decisions about the interventions that you're going to use in different situations. Now, remember, informed decision making goes to ethics. We just talked about that. So it's going to help you decide, like, how do I want to be flexible here? What do I want to integrate here? Like, if I was going to bring oracle cards into this space, like, how would that make sense with the client that I have in front of me and the applications that we've been using and what their goals are? Okay. And the other piece is client education. Now, I've said this before in other trainings, but clients, they don't care what your clinical theory is. They don't. What they want to know is that the person across from them understands how transformative change happens in the space with them and can explain it easily so that they could be like, okay, they get it, makes sense to me, and that they can have more confidence in how you're moving. That is going to help develop safety in the therapeutic space. And it's going to make you feel more confident in how you're moving as well. Drea, you have a good question. I'm going to have to sit on that for a little bit because I get a little triggered with it too. And I actually, I'm gonna get back to you, Drea, I promise, on that. Because it does seem like there is a free pass. I haven't done as much research on the topic. Someone actually told me, well, maybe you should look into, those, the Christian counselors and things like that, and why they get a free pass, what language is in there that promotes them to be able to do that. And I haven't really done that yet, but I'm going to. Maybe that will be my next training on this, or I can definitely talk to you separately about that as well. Where did I leave off? Okay, yes. So theory overall is going to help you explain how change occurs and helps us make sense of things. That's really all it is. So when I say theory, I'm not talking about modalities. Okay, I'm talking about, psychodynamic theory. I'm talking about humanistic, existential, Adlerian, you know, Bowen family system. I'm talking about like the concepts overall, like the framework that makes this modality make sense in here, right? So it's the theories that usually promote the applications, and the applications now get put into more like manualized approaches, things like that. But what's the understanding of like how change happens? How do we develop beliefs and why certain modalities work? Okay. So a pro tip for all of you who maybe are like, I don't know, like, I don't know how to pick the theory. What I would say, and this is what I teach in my integrative clinical practice framework, in my innovative practitioner accelerator program, is you have to start with your own story. I think that this is vital for a few reasons. One, if you are a therapist and you haven't taken the space to sit in and understand and have compassion for your own story and your own wounds, it will set you up to be a very dangerous therapist, because unaware therapists are going to bring their stuff into sessions, whether we like it or not. That is the concept of the unconscious and how we move. It is not to blame you. It is not to shame you. It is just for you to understand that this is how this works. It is important for you to know your story. It is important for you to understand what you went through and let that experience matter. Okay, it's so, so, so important. In my program, I have my what I call my soul purpose master plan. And what I do is I give my coaching clients journal prompts. I want to understand their story. I want to know their uniqueness. I want to know what were the big shifts that happened in their lives, and why are you so drawn to certain modalities versus others in comparison to your story. And then what I do is I provide clinical, theoretical, fundamental concepts that match the story, versus them being like, oh, this sounds good, this sounds good, this sounds good. Because then I feel like that creates a divide. So in doing so, what we end up doing is we allow the personal experience to be part of our expertise too, and help us understand why there's certain clients that we are drawn to. Because for 90% of us, we were once our own ideal client. For me, I can say that 100%. So your story does matter in how you show up in your work with clients. So let's own it, bring it in, align it with theoretical concepts that make sense so that you can better understand why you move certain way with clients and why you kind of got drawn into working, with certain modalities and things like that, so that you can really speak to that. Any feedback, questions so far? Okay. How am I doing with time? Okay. All right. So another step when it comes to creating, remaining within your scope of practice is going to be creating fusion with the modalities. And I guess I need a little disclaimer here. When I say unconventional, alternative, spiritual, non-empirically supported, non-traditional modalities, it's really hard for me to capture what I'm trying to say sometimes. So I use all of these different terms. Really what I'm saying is modalities that are unconventional to Western clinical mental health practice. Because honestly, a lot of these modalities that us in the group use, they're not like, they're ways of life. They're like concepts that have been around forever before the concept of a clinical theory even existed. I know that, that the mental health world, not so much. So sometimes we have to use language to just have it make sense. So I'm just using language to have it make sense. I'm not trying to diminish the impact of any of these applications or ways of life. So that's that disclaimer. But what we want to do in order to remain within scope of practice is take a both and perspective and not an either or perspective. So if you start, let's just say, like you do an oracle reading or a yoga class or a sound bath or whatever with a client one day, and then the next day they come in and now we're doing talk therapy, that's going to end up creating an issue because it looks like you're offering two different types of services. One more could be considered more of that coaching aspect, and one more of that clinical. So in order for you to stay within scope of practice, you have to find ways to create alignment among the modalities. This is why I teach this. And if you haven't voted, please do. The next training I'm going to be doing is on tarot and IFS. So the goal is to bring it into the space so that these types of, unconventional, alternative, innovative practices, as I like to use them, can support or accelerate the applications and modalities that are rooted in like clinical concepts or have been empirically supported, has empirically supported research to them as well. So we want to bring them in, we want to merge them in, not create two different sets of services. So, I've used this example too a few times. Like, let's just say you are talking about, some trauma from the past, and then immediately you're starting to feel it in your body. And then maybe even as a therapist, you're starting to feel the constriction in the person's heart, chakra area. And now you're just like, okay, and maybe now it's too triggering to be cognitively discussing it. Maybe this is a great time to kind of bring in some components of Reiki and sit with that emotion in the body and shift it. What we're doing is we're promoting the end goal, which is to process trauma, to build better understanding and have better coping strategies to it. So like this very much helps what we're already doing in the psychotherapy space. Hopefully that makes sense. So you want to create fusion, both and, not either or. Okay, that's going to be really, really, really important. The other thing you're going to want to do is highlight themes, because we are speaking the same language here, okay? Like same exact language. So I want you to look for the common denominator in the applications, okay? So I'm giving you just two examples here quickly, but there's always underlying themes to the approaches that you like to use. And it's just taking some exploring to figure out what that is and building verbiage around that connection. So I like using human design, and I use it in conjunction with CBT, because both of these do this. They allow for deeper insight, and they dive into personality traits and behavioral patterns. Okay, like if I was to say, like, what's a concept of human design? Like, what do you see? Deeper insight into the self, understanding personality traits and behavioral patterns. CBT, same thing. Okay, so just finding that correlation. Oracle cards and even psychoanalytic exploration. They are an avenue for symbolism and exploring unconscious material. That's just one little bit, but that's a correlation. So you can see how one modality is going to support the other. The key is you gotta build verbiage around the connection. This is super, super important. Creating the verbiage shows your understanding of the application, how it's used, and is going to show your due diligence in regards to your ethics, your competency, and like why you're integrating these modalities. Okay, so that is going to help you remain within scope of practice. Any questions? Anything so far? No questions. I'm surprised, but I love it. I'm here for it. All right. Okay. Using an evidence-based framework. Now, I like to discuss the differences between these, and I've done a training on this before, a little bit more in depth just on evidence-based framework. People tend to use these terms, evidence-based practice and empirically supported treatment modalities, like interchangeably, and they are very different. And I just want to discuss the difference with you and the importance, I believe, of using an evidence-based framework, not to as like in a rigid sense, but in a framework application sense. So when we're talking about empirically supported treatment modalities, we are talking about, all the acronym ones, like EMDR, what else? Like DBT, CBT, like all of those ones that have been vigorously studied through, randomized control studies, looked at through systematic reviews, all the things, to treat a certain symptom, diagnosis, whatever. Evidence-based practice is different. So evidence-based practice has three pillars. One is looking at the evidence that is available on the application, looking at the expertise of the practitioner, and then also integrating client values and preferences. Okay, so evidence. In my program, I will find a research study that will support the integration of whatever modality you're using and how it can align with enhancing emotional or mental well-being. That is the goal. What I think this does, shows your due diligence, that you just didn't willy-nilly just start integrating something, that there is some evidence that you can use that will support the integration of this into your practice. So in some ways, we're actually making it like, well, it's not going to be an EST because we're not doing randomized control, but it just does give the application evidence. Now, I have so many research articles already saved on like emotion code and Reiki and shamanic drumming and dancing and all of these pieces already saved. And I love working with my coaching clients because they really challenge me. They're like, okay, well, what about this? And what about this? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I've never heard of this before, but it's really fun to look for these research articles. So having them saved, available, you've read them, is going to show your due diligence. It's going to align with that ethics piece in being able to show proof that you're moving within the ethical expectations of your practice. Secondly, is going to be your expertise. You should have training on every single modality that you're bringing into your practice. So if you're bringing in Reiki, make sure you're Reiki certified. If you're bringing in things like Oracle cards and tarot, same thing. Drea has a wonderful, I haven't even taken it, so I can't even say it's wonderful, but I know of Drea, and I will say, I already know it's wonderful because she's wonderful. So there is a training on how to integrate this in psychotherapy. I would suggest you take it. There's not many trainings available that merge these two types of modalities, like the non-traditional and more conventional practices. But even if you can't get your hands and you can't find a training that is, maybe, aligned with the board or something, still go take a training. It's still going to be important for you to engage in the non-clinical training. Okay. So make sure you're not integrating anything that you haven't gotten some formal education on. Again, shows your due diligence, shows your expertise. Lastly, clients' values and preferences. I have heard so many of you, and I have so many DMs where it's like, I only bring this up if the client brings it up. Let me tell you the problem with that. Based on the research that I have, clients are scared and petrified to bring up their interest in alternative and spiritual practices to their practitioners because they think they're going to get judged. Now, this comes more from a medical model, but unfortunately, the mental health field is driven by a biomedical model. And, even though the world is changing and we're growing, clients are scared to bring this up. So it's really on us to see if they're interested, asking in our assessment process, all of that. Additionally, we need to be marketing to our ideal client and be transparent about our methodology. If you look at my private practice website, it's all about transparency. I talk about all the different practices I bring in. And I can't tell you how many times people have reached out to me and be like, oh, I reached out to you because I saw that you posted about human design and oracle cards, and I'm all about that. Great. So we're not shoving this down people's throats. We are just saying, this is the applications we use. This is how it aligns with clinical theory. This is how it's going to show up in our practice. You can choose to be part of it or not. So market, don't be scared to market yourself. And I'm also going to say, and as you're marketing yourself, make sure you're moving within ethical guidelines. Make sure you're hitting all of these pieces so that you can move professionally free. You showing up 100%, owning all pieces of you, gives permission to your clients to do the same. Do not move in fear here. There's absolutely a way to integrate this into your practice legally and ethically. Okay. I know I talked about the training a little bit before on making sure you get training, but I just want to expand a little bit more on this. This is my personal opinion regarding integrity. So don't integrate modalities that you haven't personally used. I think the experiential process, and we're going to have Karen who's going to talk more about experiential theories and applications later on in the month. Or sorry, I think August 1st or 2nd. I can't remember. But it's in the events. I think this allows for genuineness to show up in the clinical space. So I've had people be like, oh, well, I want to use tarot and I want to use this and I want to use Reiki. And I said, okay, well, are you trained? Do you use this personally? No. If you don't use these applications personally, start there. See if you like them. especially if, like, let's just say you're someone who, has some level of neurodivergence, right? And maybe you've tweaked or modified an application of something to make it more suitable for you. And let's say you work with, a neurodivergent population. I think this is like a beautiful way for like you to have experienced this and then bring it into the session. Like, to me, I think that's where integrity stands. Like, you shouldn't be learning applications for the clients. You should be learning applications to understand yourself, use it, and then apply it. You should have some connection to it. Okay. Again, don't use any modalities that you haven't gotten training on. And, we decided to, be regulated by a board. We're the ones who got licensed. So we need to make sure that we're remaining within our scope of practice always. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? All right. So when it comes to these modalities, I want to say that like there isn't like these huge risks associated with like complementary and alternative practices, but there can be risks and we need to be able to talk about them. That's why I also think participating in whatever modalities you're bringing to the table before you bring it into like sessions is going to be important, because maybe there's going to be some things you come up that you didn't know were going to be there. I'm going to just use this as an example, even though I know that this has nothing to do with mental health, but I was having pretty severe shoulder pain because I had a rib that was out of place. I've already looked up the emotional, spiritual connection to that. And I went for a massage, and it was pretty intense massage. And she offered to do some cupping on that section too. So I did that also. When I got up from this massage, I was so nauseous. I was spiraling a little bit. I was like, oh my goodness, like, I don't know what's going on. And my massage therapist was like, okay, bye, see you next time. And she left. No conversations with me about like, please make, I mean, I know this because I've been doing this, but like no conversations with me about making sure I drink enough water. No conversations about like taking it easy for the rest of the night. Like, please don't drive in your car before you head off, all of these things. And I was like, you probably should have said that. It was an amazing massage. I feel great now. Whew, amazing. But like, there are always risks to the healing process. So even though there's going to be expansion and growth and healing, there's also going to be some other things that come up too. And it's really important for you to highlight that in your informed consent and service agreement, and even verbally before you integrate the practices. I've even like sometimes in sound bath healing, this has happened for me, mainly more just like the dizziness and physical reactions, but sometimes like I'll be crying out of nowhere. Like, why am I crying for 5 days straight? After doing a lifeline session. Oh, that's because I, opened up that portal and all that. So I want you to be really transparent about that, because like honestly, even in therapy, there's risks that we list in there, but it's going to be really important for you to be as exhaustive as possible. And I help with this also in my program, because sometimes it's like, well, I don't know. So what I've had my coaching clients do is I'm like, well, walk me through. Like, walk me through the whole process. And like, I'm just going to tell you what's kind of coming up for me as you're kind of walking me through that process. Oh, hey, Desiree. Okay, great. Yeah, please be sure to watch the replay. So there's also going to be some general risks that like, I definitely have in my informed consent that like engaging in non-empirically supported modalities can delay access to empirically supported modalities that could, promote, the resolve of certain symptom presentation, blah, blah, blah. Like, you can put that in there. Also, even like sometimes like I've had individuals get too reliant on oracle cards where like they're actually like leaning on that message versus trusting themselves, and then they're kind of disconnected, and then the message gets skewed, and then like we don't want that either. So it's going to be important to kind of like talk about that in the process and in your informed consent verbally. Okay, so let's talk about the personalized and transparent informed consent and the pieces that I make sure are in there. And because this is really what is going to show competency and show integrity and show ethics and show decision making, because I jam pack my informed consent is so long, and I literally have an appendix that's just like, I do this and this and this and this, and like, but this is what has allowed me to feel professionally free and just competent in what I'm doing. So when it comes to your informed consent, you want to, number one, put your clinical, like your integrative clinical practice framework, like list the clinical theories that support the work that you are doing. I think I've given some examples of this in the past, but just like in layman's terms, like identify the clinical concepts and then just in layman's terms, kind of discuss how you're going to see that show up in your practice with clients. Again, do our clients care? No. Honestly, like they really don't. I've asked my clients, like, do you want me to go over this? I don't care. Like you seem like you know what you're talking about. I was like, okay, great. But this is for you. This is for you to just understand that the work you do is impactful. There's a process to it. It's rooted in clinical understanding and that you have it somewhere. So important. You're also going to want to explain your complementary and alternative methods, your spiritual practices, all of that, like in detail, but not like exhaustive. Just kind of give an understanding of like, this is what human design is. This is what tarot cards are. This is how you'll see it show up in session, things like that. You could also give them links for more information on just the modality itself if you want to. Again, building transparency, helping with informed decision-making, all of that. Then, super important, you want to create some verbiage. Again, it doesn't have to be very long, but just creating a link between the complementary approaches and the clinical applications or empirically supported treatment modalities or theories that you are using. So I have that in my informed consent. Every single clinical theory that I have in my integrative clinical practice framework, I align it to show how the innovative or unconventional practices that I use, you can find the beliefs and understanding of that theory in that practice. So it also shows due diligence, but it also helps me understand, like, this is why I love this so much. It aligns with this. Put your links for research available in your informed consent. So a client can go, oh, they use emotion code. What is that? Is that even really empirically supportable? Put the link there so that they can see. And that this also shows, like, God forbid you're ever, brought to court for any reason saying like, oh, you're using things outside of your scope of practice. Like, this is going to show that you are 100% moving within scope of practice and moving within the guidelines that have been provided for you by the state and your ethics board. It's going to include all this in here. And you're also going to want to list your training. So all of the different trainings that you've had clinically, all the different trainings you've had spiritually, whatever, pop it all in there, have the dates of when you took the training. If you got a certification, write it in there too, whatever, like just put everything in there so that's all buttoned up. So this is everything you're going to need to stay within scope of practice. I do know that it is a lot. That's why I've built a program around this, because I did this on my own and it was very stressful. But it was like, once I figured it out, it was kind of locked in. So now I really get it. And I built my program alongside a malpractice. I built my private practice, or redefined my private practice alongside a malpractice attorney group, because I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, help me figure this out. And once I kind of got the formula together, I was like, okay, like I could totally teach therapists how to do this now that I kind of understand what's really in there. So I just want to quickly go over my program, what it includes, in case you are interested. So I do go through every single thing that I just went through in this training. So you're not left alone with this. Like, I got you. I'm here for you. You can ask my coaching clients. Like, I do not just give up on them. Whatever they got, I'm in it with you. We will figure it out. We'll get the research. We'll build the language, all of that. So week one is, well, phase one is just my welcome introduction. So everyone who joins my Innovative Practitioner Accelerator program, you get access to your human design. I love integrating human design for understanding of the self and for coaching. So I incorporate that into my program. But the first thing we start with is mission and mindset and understanding the clinical concepts that support your practice. Oh, I see a question. Honestly, Pamela, the question was, is it problematic if the dates of the training in spiritual practice were several years before licensing? I would say put it in there anyway. And if you can, just get more updated training, but I don't think it matters. It's still showing that you got training on it. So, I mean, like, I got my master's degree in 2006, still counts, right? So I would say put it in there. And if there is something you just want additional newer, like, dates for that you've gone to those trainings, I mean, we have to get training anyway. we have to spend we have expenses for our business that we have to use anyway, right? So I would say, if you can, just take more training. But I don't think it's problematic. It still counts. Yeah, so phase 2 of the program, this is where we work on building your integrative clinical practice framework. You get the journal prompts for the sole purpose master plan. At the end of that, you're going to have your full integrative clinical practice framework all together. Third phase, we get into niching and core messaging so that you can really focus on who your ideal client is and becoming a magnet for your ideal client. This is really going to be important when it comes to marketing, because usually the biggest issue therapists have is a messaging issue, not a marketing issue. And when we're trying to speak to everyone, we literally speak to no one. It is okay to be an expert in your craft, right? And like for me, when I said that like 90% of us were once our ideal client, I mean that for myself. Like my whole story had to do with being a very anxious adult and finding myself in these really toxic relationships and codependent spaces. And I work amazing with that population, like quick accelerated healing with that population. So it's okay for me to work with that population. I'm pretty much an expert in that. So this part is really important. So developing a niche statement, elevator pitches, but then also understanding your core messaging in terms of who you want to market to. Then we get into the clinical fusion blueprint. So this is where we are taking all of those innovative practices. We are going to align it with clinical theory. We're going to align it with empirically supported treatment modalities. We're going to highlight the themes. We're going to identify the risks, the benefits, and we're going to blend all of it together so you have that solid verbiage for them when we get into phase 5, which is building your personalized clinical documentation bundle. So you get the same informed consent and service agreement that I built with my lawyers. I just highlighted the areas that had my information. We're going to plug in yours, and we are going to build it out with all of the information that you just built, or we just built and co-created in phase 4. I also didn't have it here, but I also include like a Notice of Privacy Act. I also have notices like terms of use and disclaimers for websites, stuff like that I also include. I also help you create intake assessment questions based off your integrative clinical practice framework, and also teach you a really simple way to make a bank of treatment goals that align both the unconventional practices and conventional practices, and creating alignment in that in your objectives and interventions. Then phase 6, we talk about money mindset and, divine compensation and coming from an abundance mindset. And then phase 7, we talk about redefinition and marketing so that you can prep your social media, really know your branding, and how to use AI to make quick, fast, easy content. You also get access to my VIP group. The people in my coaching program are amazing. It's such a co-created space because I am learning from them. They are learning from me. It is beautiful. Like I've never seen such support exist before, and it can make me cry. So we have group coaching calls where we deep dive in. You'll see me search for research articles. You'll see the process that I use. I also have guest speakers come in. We had Deanna come in. She was an ethical expert. And I also have psychics come in. We're doing a message circle next week. Like I'm really here to promote and support and like empower unconventional therapists to keep going, because the world needs you. The world does not need another textbook therapist. So that is everything I have. If anyone is interested in learning more about this program or learning about the different tier options I have, please feel free to comment below. I will send you that information. Well, Stephanie, you're here. Are you in Alaska yet? I'm not sure, but if you are, that's awesome. I hope you're having fun. And yeah, so if you have any questions for me, please let me know. And I hope you got a lot out of this. I know it was a ton of information, but the beautiful thing is you only got to do this once, and then you never have to do this again. So you guys are amazing. Thank you for watching and checking in. And if you're watching the replay and you have any feedback or questions, please feel free to leave it below. Thanks, Drea. All right, let me see if I know how to end this now. Okay.